Okay guys, so let's go through this problem. This is number 2 on your homework 15. And it's number 2, 2x squared plus 8x minus 7 is equal to negative 2. So what do you think? Is the expression above in standard form? And the answer is absolutely not. It is not in standard form yet. We need to have all of our terms on one side of our expression for this to be in standard form. So the very first thing that I need to do to get this in standard form is pull this 2 from the right side over to the left side. And the way that we do that is by adding 2, we add 2, and then we add 2. And if I want to write this in standard form, I get 2x squared plus 8x plus 8x. And we've got negative 7 plus 2, that's going to give me negative 5 is equal to 0. So now that our expression is in standard form, now that all of my terms are on one side of the equation, I know that this is in standard form. So now, identify A, B, and C. What do you think A is in this expression? Yeah, so A in this expression, if you remember our general form for a quadratic that's in standard form, is A, x squared, plus bx, plus c is equal to 0. So we remember that our A is the number in front of x squared. It is not this entire term. It's just the number in front of the x squared. So in this case, our number in front of the x squared is 2. So I say A is equal to 2. Okay. Now, what do you think B is in our expression above? Yeah, in this case, we know that B is the number in front of the x. B is the number in front of the x, so we look at our expression. What number do we have in front of the x? In this case, it is B is equal to positive 8. Now, finally, what do you think C is in our expression below? Yeah, so we know that C is the term that does not have a variable attached to it, and the only term that does not have a variable attached to it in part A is this 5. The 5 term does not have a variable attached to it, so it's going to be negative 5. Our C in this case is negative 5. Now, step C says, or part C says, write the quadratic equation down. The quadratic equation, or the quadratic formula, is whatever variable that we have. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, we know what A, B, and C are, so at this point, all we have to do is just plug these numbers in. Plug B in for B, plug A in for A, and plug 5 in for C, or negative 5 in for C, and just plug it into your calculator and solve for both solutions. And remember, we're going to have two solutions because we have a plus or minus sign here. Okay, so we're going to do negative b plus the square root and then negative b minus the square root, and both of those are going to be over 2a. So let's see what that looks like. Let's go to the next slide. Now all we have to do, we're already on the next slide here. Alright, so I've got the quadratic equation written down, and I've got this A, B, and C from the previous problem. 2, 8, and negative 5. I just copied it down here so we don't have to go back and forth between the slides. So now let's just plug these in. Let's plug B in for B, A in for A, and C in for C. And we get X is equal to, we know that B is 8, and don't forget about this negative sign. It's going to be negative 8 plus or minus the square root of B. Okay, here's a B squared, so our B is 8, so it's going to be 8 squared minus 4 times A. Okay, here's our A, it's equal to 2, 4 times A, so I'll plug in 2 here. And our C is negative 5, so I'll plug in negative 5 for C, and I get negative 5. All that is under the square root, all over 2 times A, 2 times A, so that's going to be 2, all over 2. Okay, now we just start solving for each individual part. We got negative 8 plus or minus the square root. Okay, now if you just plug this into your calculator, 8 squared is going to be 64, then minus 4 times 2 times negative 5, and you get, underneath the square root, And really, before I write this down, let me just go ahead and shorten that square root, because I know it's not going to be that large like it was in the last one. We get 104 underneath the square root. So that 104 comes from, and you can check this. Just type in 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5 in your calculator, and you should get 104, and then all of this over the 2 times 2, which is going to be 4, and then we have our two solutions that we can break up into 2, and we get our square roots. Okay, we've got negative 8. We've got negative 8 plus the square root of 104 over 4, and we also have negative 8 minus the square root of 104 over 4, and you can plug each of these into your calculator and solve, and what you find is that the top one, this top solution, is equal to 0.55. Okay, and I'm rounding there. And then I plug the bottom one into my calculator and solve, and what I find is negative 4.55, and I also rounded there. So the fact that I'm rounding to get these two solutions, honestly, if it doesn't give you a nice integer number, I would just leave your final solution like this. This is perfectly fine to leave your final solution in fraction form, even with the square root. It really doesn't matter. But in science, especially in physics, you typically need to know exactly what these numbers are, even if they are rounded. So usually you would take one of these and actually use the number to do more calculations. But for this, let's just leave it exact. We know that both of these are okay. Both of these are exact. But if you needed to evaluate them, you would just plug it into your calculator and get these two. But leaving it as a fraction is perfectly fine, just to keep the answer more exact. So those are your two solutions. Now, wasn't that easy? That is why I've been stressing the importance of using this method, and why I didn't understand the purpose of going over completing the square and going over factoring to solve quadratic equations when the quadratic formula can be used to solve any quadratic equation. So let's just practice some now. You've got another worksheet that I'll give you in class today or tomorrow, and you can go ahead and start working through these problems and until you master it. So just let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.